What happened? What are you doing in the middle of the funeral?
This is bad. Look at this note. I ran out of the funeral home in a panic during my mother-in-law's funeral. My husband, startled, chased after me. I showed my husband the note I found in my mother-in-law's hand, and he was surprised too. We would soon call the police. My mother-in-law and I had been close, as if we were a real mother and daughter, before my husband and I got married. My mother-in-law was very special to me, because I had lost both of my parents. I'm very happy that I married my husband, whom I love, but I'm also very happy that I became accustomed to my mother-in-law. Then, my mother-in-law suddenly passed away. She fell from a balcony. During her funeral, I held her hand in the coffin and found a note with the most frightening thing written on it. I am Jane, and I'm 30 years old, and I have an office job. My husband Mike is 2 years older than me and works in sales. We were both students in the music club at the same university. We only talked occasionally during our college days because we both were in relationships. My husband is a very good singer and writes wonderful songs that cheer us up when we listen to them. The band in which my husband sang was the most popular in the music club, and I think it was at the level where they could have gone pro. I remember that I looked up to my husband and felt a little sad when I heard that he was going to quit the band and get a regular job after graduation. A few years after graduating from college, I went to a live music club to see a band I liked and happened to run into him again. We were both there alone, and we had a lot to talk about after a long time, so we ended up having dinner together after the show. We had dinner together after the concert, and there was no end to our conversation, so we decided to go to karaoke. Mike's singing voice was as beautiful as it had been back then. I was happy to know that he was continuing to play in a band while working. After that day, I often went to live concerts and dinners with Mike. No matter how many times we went, we always had a lot to talk about, and before we knew it, it would already be past midnight. We had known each other for a long time, and we liked the same bands, but I didn't think we would have such a good rapport. Mike seems to feel the same way, and we started dating a few months after we met again. After I started dating him, I was so happy every day. Of course, I enjoyed seeing Mike every day, but I also enjoyed going to the occasional live concert where his band performed. Mike introduced me to his mother, who had come to see him perform for the first time of many times. "Hello, I'm Jane, Mike's girlfriend." I nervously introduced myself. "You don't have to be so nervous. I've always been sad being at the concert alone. I'm glad you're here," my mother-in-law said and shook my hand. My mother-in-law had a wonderful smile and looked so young that I couldn't believe she had given birth to Mike. She didn't look out of place in a live music club full of young people. Afterwards, we had a lot of fun talking about today's concert. Although our age gap was quite large, I felt as if I was talking to someone my own age, and we quickly became friends in just one day. We exchanged contact information that day, and my mother-in-law and I started going to see Mike's live concert together. We sometimes had dinner before or after the concert, and I looked forward to that because she knew many good restaurants. My mother-in-law would smile at me as I ate deliciously. Even if I left Mike, I was so fond of my mother-in-law that I wanted to continue my relationship with her. 3 years later, we got married. I was so surprised and happy that I couldn't stop crying when my husband proposed to me from the stage during one of his concerts. I looked at my mother-in-law, who was standing next to me. "I'm so happy that Jane and I are going to be a family. I'm so glad," she said with tears streaming down her face. I laughed when I saw my mother-in-law crying more than me. I have been without a mother for as long as I can remember, and my father died of illness right after I graduated from college. I have no siblings, so I have no one I can call family. I was so happy not only to be married, but also to be a family with my husband and mother-in-law whom I love very much. Soon, I started living with my husband and mother-in-law. My father-in-law apparently passed away a few years ago due to illness. My mother-in-law quit her job to take care of my father-in-law and now works part-time at a shopping center several times a week. I had only met my mother-in-law outside the house, so I discovered many new things about her when I started living with her. First of all, she's a very good cook. She's very skilled and makes dishes every day that are restaurant quality. She told me that her hobby is to go to many good restaurants and study cooking every day. Another thing is that she lives a very healthy lifestyle. She gets up early in the morning to go running, stretches carefully every night, and go to bed at 10 p.m. I thought my mother-in-law's usefulness came from her daily efforts. I have always loved my mother-in-law, but living with her every day has taught me a lot about what I need to learn from her. I've become a better cook, and although not as good as my mother-in-law, I've unknowingly lost a lot of weight that I hadn't lost in a long time because of my healthy lifestyle. Since we got married, a lot of great things have happened. I'm so happy every day. I have nothing but gratitude for my husband and mother-in-law. My husband and I have been able to be like lovers, just as we were before we got married. He sang to me at home sometimes, and I was happy to hear my husband singing anytime. When I would cook dishes modeled after my mother-in-law's,
Jane, this is amazing. It might taste better than my mom's.
he would compliment me like so. No way, your mom is the one who taught me. When I say this, no, this is your skill. You've got a good sense for cooking, my mother-in-law would say as she laughs. 3 years into our marriage, we were still happy. We never had any fights, and we lived a peaceful life. One day, however, the atmosphere in the home changed when my sister-in-law suddenly returned home. My sister-in-law, Amelia, is 5 years older than my husband. I couldn't believe that she was family with my always cheerful mother-in-law and husband, since she had an overbearing personality. We invited her to our wedding, but she refused, so this was the first time I met her. She had been married and a housewife, but she was divorced and had suddenly returned home. She did not tell my mother-in-law and my husband in advance about it, and they were surprised to see her. I'm going to live here from today. Would you clean up my room? My sister-in-law said coldly to me as I was about to greet her. I was off work that day, so I did as my sister-in-law told me and cleaned up her room, which was in a state of storage. My husband and mother-in-law said they would talk to my sister-in-law. For the first time since we got married, there was a sense of discomfort in the home. As I was cleaning up, I was listening to the conversation. I don't mind you living here, but you have to work and put money in the house. Don't cause trouble for Jane, my mother-in-law said. I know that. Mom, you're always so annoying, my sister-in-law retorts.
Sis, don't talk like that. If you're going to live here, you should let us know in advance. If you can keep your promises, I will have you leave, my husband said in a strong tone. Yeah, whatever. Mike, you're always on Mom's side, my sister-in-law replied. I had never seen my husband speak in such a strong tone. My mother-in-law's usual smile disappeared, and she looked doubtful. I didn't say anything after hearing this conversation, but I was worried about the days to come. After that, my life changed drastically.
My sister-in-law began to give me a hard time. When I came home from work, "Hey, I'm hungry. You're a wife, right? When you come home, make dinner quickly," she would tell me before I even have time to put away my bags. When I quickly began to make dinner, my mother-in-law came home and asked me, "Jane, what's wrong? You can cook dinner once you change. Mike's not even home yet." She says this to me sounding worried. I couldn't say that Amelia told me to do this, so I was feeling troubled. "I told her to do it. She's a wife, so it's natural for her to do this. Mom, you're being too easy on her," my sister-in-law said without a trace of apology. "What's natural? If you ask me, it's only natural that you, who isn't working yet, should be the one to cook. Are you looking for a job in the first place?" When she says this, Amelia replies, "There's no good job out there, so it can't be helped. You're always taking the wife's side rather than mine." She started talking selfishly like a child, and the two of them started arguing. I felt awkward, but I could only concentrate on making dinner in silence. My husband came home and saw my mother-in-law and sister-in-law arguing.
Hey, what's going on? Amelia, did you say something selfish again?
Amelia replies, "Why is it my fault? You didn't even listen to my side of the story. In the first place, that wife of yours," and she pointed at me. "Jane is not to blame. Stop blaming others." And then the arguing continues.
I get it now. Both of you stop it. The food Jane cooked is getting cold. Let's eat dinner.
And my husband calms them both down. I felt bad because I was the one who started it. I'm glad my mother-in-law is protective of me, but that makes my sister-in-law angry. I didn't know how to behave properly anymore. After my sister-in-law went back to her room, "Jane, I'm really sorry. If she says anything to you, you tell me right away."
Jane, I'm really sorry. My sister has always been like that,
they told me. After that, my sister-in-law would give me a hard time, and there were many times when my mother-in-law would defend me, and they would end up arguing. Each time, my sister-in-law would say, "I can't believe you take the wife's side instead of your own daughter's." I think my mother-in-law is not only taking my side, but she's angry with my sister-in-law because she's the cause of the problem. But it hurt to hear her say that. And when the two of them argue, my husband gets angry too. It got to the point where there would be a fight at least once a day. My sister-in-law says she's looking for a job, but there's no sign of her starting to work at all. She does not do any housework and spends most of the day in bed or on the couch looking at her phone. My mother-in-law, who used to smile and look so young every day, seems to have aged a little since my sister-in-law came back. I wonder if she gets tired of arguing with her. My husband has stopped singing at home. He hasn't performed at any live concert recently. It seems that the happy days we used to have just a few months ago were just a dream. A few days later, while I was at work, I received a phone call from my husband. My mother-in-law had fallen from the balcony and had to be rushed to the emergency room. Since we live on the 5th floor, I was so worried about my mother-in-law that I left work early and headed for the hospital. However, by the time I arrived at the hospital, my mother-in-law had already passed away. The atmosphere in our home had been bad recently, and I didn't have as many chances to enjoy talking with my mother-in-law as I used to. I couldn't stop crying for a long time, thinking that there were so many things I wanted to talk about and do with her. My sister-in-law was at home when my mother-in-law fell off the balcony. I wondered for a moment, could it have been my sister-in-law? But I tried not to think about it, because even though we weren't close, I knew she wouldn't go that far. According to my sister-in-law, my mother-in-law was hanging the laundry on the balcony. My sister-in-law said that she heard a loud noise as she was lounging around as usual, and when she went to the balcony, she couldn't see my mother-in-law and called the police. My sister-in-law was crying as she spoke. We then made arrangements for the wake and funeral. My husband made most of the arrangements, but the time passed in a flurry as we dealt with many relatives and acquaintances of my mother-in-law. Surprisingly, my sister-in-law was also very cooperative and did a lot of work. I decided to concentrate on sending my mother-in-law on her way during the funeral. At the end of the funeral, I said goodbye to my mother-in-law in the casket. As I recalled everything that had happened to my mother-in-law from the day I met her until now, I was filled with many thoughts and feelings. With tears streaming down my face, I took my mother-in-law's hand for the last time and found a small piece of paper in her hand. When I took it out, it looked like a torn piece of a notepad. Curious, I looked inside the note and was astonished. I couldn't stop shaking at the sight of the dreadful note and ran out of the room. People in the hall were looking at me with a buzz. As I was outside crying and shaking, my husband came after me.
What happened? What are you doing in the middle of a funeral?
My husband seemed angry. Of course he would be. I just ran out in the middle of a funeral. With trembling hands, I showed him the note. "This is bad. Look at this note." The note in my mother-in-law's hand read, "It's Mom's fault for always taking the wife's side. If you had taken my side, none of this would have happened. Your favorite wife will be next." And it was written in my sister-in-law's handwriting. It was like she was saying she did it. It's not conclusive evidence, but it might be something. Just imagining how she must have felt writing such a note was terrifying. I was afraid to even look at my sister-in-law's face. All I could do was run away. But
What the hell is this? I'm going to go talk to the people in the hall, so wait here.
my husband couldn't hide his emotions, but he knew he had to be firm, and he handled it calmly.
Jane, it's okay. I'm with you. We'll get the police to do something about it. It's better for Mom.
My husband said, hugging me as I trembled. My husband told the people in the hall what had happened, showed them the note, and they called the police. I waited there shaking. My sister-in-law came outside and asked me, "What's going on? Don't you think it's disrespectful to my mother to be flopping around during a funeral? Why are you outside? You're insane." Then my husband said,
Shut up and sit inside.
he said loudly. My sister-in-law returned to the hall with a strange look on her face. I guess she didn't think we had seen her note. The attendee also looked at us strangely, but the funeral proceeded to the end, and when they finished putting my mother-in-law in the hearse, the police arrived and took my sister-in-law to the police station. My sister-in-law said, "I don't understand. Why should I go to the police? What did I do?" She was in a rage the whole time. My husband and I looked at her coldly as she was being taken away by the police. The people in attendance were in a state of confusion, but they went straight to the crematorium. That was the last time I saw my sister-in-law. The house was searched again, and my sister-in-law confessed to the crime, and she was arrested later that day. I heard her crying like a child at the police station, saying she hated her mother, who wouldn't take her side. They found sleeping pills in her room, which Amelia mixed into my mother-in-law's drink, and then instructed her to dry the laundry. While drying the laundry, my sister-in-law apparently pushed my drowsy mother-in-law on her back. She really only meant to injure her, but she died, partly because of the concrete underneath. When I heard the police story, I was filled with fear and anger. I really can't forgive her. She's a selfish woman. I was terrified that my sister-in-law would come home until I got the call that she was under arrest. When the news of her arrest came, my husband and I were relieved. Then a criminal trial took place, and my sister-in-law was found guilty. She was also thinking of rebelling against me, so the charges were more serious, and she was going to jail for more than 10 years. I really wish the charges were more serious, but it's a court decision, so I guess it's inevitable. My husband handled all the criminal trials. Now that the investigation was over, I laid my hands firmly on my mother-in-law's grave and apologized over and over in my heart. I'm still scared to this day that if I hadn't found the note then, maybe I would have been next. My husband and I told each other's company about the situation, filed moving papers, and moved to another part of the country, so that we wouldn't have to face my sister-in-law who came out of prison one day. I don't think she will ever find out where we move. We decided to build my mother-in-law's grave in the place where we moved. We started a new life in a new place without changing our jobs. To be honest, I haven't completely recovered. There are days when I remember my mother-in-law and cry. Still, my husband and I decided to look forward to life little by little. Whenever I feel down, my husband sings to me. My husband happily tells me that he hopes he can form a band again in a new town. On the other hand, when my husband is down, I cook a dish that my mother-in-law taught me and eat it with him. In this way, we encouraged each other and gradually moved forward. Before going to work in the morning and before going to bed at night, my husband and I always offer incense and pray at my mother-in-law's altar. When I say I'm off when I got to work, I think I hear my mother-in-law's voice.
Did I just hear my mom say stay safe?
Maybe my husband can hear my mother-in-law's voice too. My mother-in-law is no longer here, but she will always be someone I look up to, just as she always has been. Today, I'm cooking something she taught me how to make.
My mill meddled with a wedding and insisted on coming on a honeymoon. The outcome of telling her the shocking truth about my husband was,
My name is Madison. I'm 39 years old. I recently got an electric blanket to save on electricity bills. It's making it harder for me to get out of my bed in the morning. The other day, I wasn't planning on snoozing, but I fell back asleep and was almost late for work. Beware of electric blankets. What? I'm just being spoiled? I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, I want to tell you about when I was married to a spoiled brat. I'm sure you will all be annoyed with him too. It was 10 years ago. I had just gotten engaged to Daniel, a man I met on a dating app. To be frank, I was getting impatient seeing my friends get married one after another. Then I found my husband at last. I was overjoyed and had my head in clouds thinking I was chosen by a good man too. However, there was an instant that snapped me back to reality. It was when I went to meet Daniel's mom, Sarah, for the first time. He was the only child raised by a single mother. I was told in advance by him that she loved him so much, but it turned out to be more than I had expected. I was brought to her house and was totally stunned by what she said even before I could finish introducing myself. You chose a woman who is nothing like me. She looked me up and down. She expected her son to marry a woman who looked just like her. I didn't think it was particularly odd. Some mothers tell their daughters to find a good husband like their father. What left a bad taste in my mouth was the way she looked at me and spoke to me. Her gaze and the tone of her voice made me think of a jealous girlfriend. Madison is a smart woman who can take a step back and look at things from a different perspective, just like you, Mom. Daniel tried to smooth things out, but his comment only added more discomfort to me. I didn't feel like he was praising me at all, even though that was supposed to be praise. In response to him, "Oh, really?" Sarah smiled and seemed to be pleased, which made me even more uncomfortable. After he explained that she and I were actually similar, her attitude toward me softened. "I'm glad to hear that you're just like me." She gave me a satisfactory smile. I know people sometimes unconsciously choose a partner who looks like their parents. I have a friend just like that too, but Daniel sounded like he chose me because I resembled his mom. In truth, we were nothing like each other. I had never thought of myself as someone who could look at things from a different perspective. Instead, I was the type of person people around me normally commented to be quite direct. I couldn't fathom what made him say such a thing. He was probably just trying to make his mom happy. I questioned whether it was a good idea to marry a guy who had to kiss his mom's butt. Although such a doubt came up in my mind, I denied myself that it was nothing. It was my long-awaited marriage after all. As the wedding plan progressed, I began to forget the discomfort I had felt upon meeting Sarah. At that time, I was running at full power trying to grasp the happiness in front of me at any cost. Then again, a problem arose. Daniel mentioned that he would send half of his salary to Sarah after we got married. He was not well paid. We were just talking that we both had to work to make ends meet. I also wanted to save money for our baby in the future. Of course, I didn't think he should neglect his mom or anything like that, but I told him it was too much for us to support her. She raised me single-handedly, and we'll be all alone at home. I think she deserves that much. He started weeping to my surprise. I was taken aback to see him react in such a way. I wondered if our marriage was going to be okay, but again, I tried to tell myself that he was a sensible person with strong ties with his mother, coming from a single-parent family. It was right before our wedding, so I also had a strong feeling of responsibility to understand him. I honestly had no idea how he felt, but I assumed that was the way it was, and I needed to accept him as he was. That was exactly what people say, love is blind. Looking back on it now, I realized how stupid I was. We talked about sending money on many occasions, and I told him not to do it every time. In the end, I was forced to agree to 1/3 of his salary instead of half. Many things weren't settled, yet the wedding day was getting closer and closer. I did think about canceling it at one point. I just couldn't make up my mind when I thought about the cancellation fee, and settled on having more discussions after the wedding. There were also issues with the wedding planning. For some reason, Sarah kept interfering with us and told us what to wear and how the event should progress. Daniel listened to her every word, so the fall event had changed a lot. My requests for this and that were mostly replaced by her taste. It's normal for parents to advise their children to make their wedding day better, she told me. Daniel also said, "A wedding my mom plans will be an amazing one. She's always right." He was adamant about it. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I didn't even remember my dad's face. On top of that, my mom, who raised me, passed away when I was in college. I had no one to talk to about whether what Sarah was doing was normal or not. Needless to say, we ended up with a wedding painted in her colors. I felt as if I was just a surrogate bride for her and Daniel to get married. I thought her meddling was just momentary. Once we got married, it was gradually going to disappear. It was better than having to deal with an evil mother-in-law. I was still somewhat optimistic at that time. Although I was young and not familiar with the world, I was too naive. Now, 10 years later, I wish I had known more about the average family and had someone I could have consulted. My naivete was shattered once again about half a month after the wedding. You're going on your honeymoon at the end of next month, right? I'm going to miss you. I want to go to Hawaii too. The last part of what Sarah spoke sounded like a spoiled child, which grossed me out. Then Daniel smiled in response. Of course, Mom. I'll pay for your trip. I had no choice but to protest. Wait a minute. What? Is that a no? Then Sarah pressured me. Sure I can, right, Madison? Well, it's our honeymoon, not a family trip. When I apologetically explained to her, she became furious. How dare you? Daniel is my son. I won't let you take him away from me just because you're married to him. What are you talking about, Mom? I'll never leave you. Even if I'm married, you're still my number one. With tears in her eyes, she hugged him tightly, and he gently patted the back of her head. I realized that my marriage was no longer possible at that point. The scene was nothing but unpleasant. I was filled with distaste. The sight of them made me sick. Fortunately, he said he would pay for her share of the honeymoon. I decided to go along with him and knock him down later. I apologized to both of them and settled the situation. I kept an eagle eye on them until the day of the honeymoon. When it finally arrived, Sarah was smiling ear to ear. Even though we hadn't arrived in Hawaii yet, she showed up at the airport wearing a hibiscus necklace. I'm so excited. I haven't taken a trip with you in years. You have a lot of fun, Mom. Daniel was also all smiles while talking to his mom. Of course, if Madison wasn't here, it would have been a nice family trip. Don't worry, she's here to help you. You can ask her to carry your luggage. On top of saying whatever they wanted to say about me, they were holding each other's hands for some reason. I didn't think anything of it anymore. I just kept them out of my sight as much as possible. It was definitely not good for my mental health. I had an important business to take care of. I'm sorry to interrupt your excitement. Sarah, do you know how he came up with the money for your trip? What's the matter, Madison, out of the blue? I questioned her with a serious face, and she tensed up. What's going on, honey? Daniel was perplexed. Daniel, you're in debt and behind on all your shopping bills, aren't you? Both he and Sarah gasped at the same time in response to my question. I found a notice in the mailbox on my day off right after we got married. They said that you had neglected to pay the bills for several months. I flashed a few statements and demanded letters in front of him, who instantly became pale. I had a bad feeling about this, so I secretly looked into your bank account, and bingo! I found the name and history of the moneylender. He started trembling. Is it true, Daniel? Even Sarah turned pale and squeezed his arm. He remained silent. I looked at the credit card statements. It seems you've been buying a lot of brand name goods. Well, that's... His agitation was apparent at that point. It's strange, isn't it? You don't have any brand name goods, even though you have such a record. Well, it's a misunderstanding. At first, I thought you were giving them to Sarah as gifts, but I guess not. I looked into your phone too. It's locked. I wouldn't have figured it out if you hadn't said it to your birthday. You shouldn't have used such a no-brainer password. His face turned red when I pointed that out. You seem to be very fond of a former stripper named Foxy. And you've been paying her a lot of money even after she quit working. You're such a nice wallet for her. You even borrowed money to pay her. You seem to think she loves you. I quickly scattered printouts of her photo and the correspondences that I had found on his phone. He crawled onto the floor in a panic and gathered up those papers. Sarah yelled, "You've fallen for such a flamboyant woman?" She looked shocked, just as a girlfriend would be. "And you don't really care about your mom, do you?" "What?" Her eyes almost popped out of her head. "Stop it. Don't say any more." He shouted, but didn't seem to realize that his reaction proved I was right more than anything else. He was digging his own grave. I found inexcusable evidence in his chat with Foxy. If it was for her, he didn't care about getting into debt. He was getting married soon and was having me keep working so he could give half of his salary to her, claiming it as an allowance to his mom. In the future, he will live with his mom and use her pension to pay off the debts. His mom loved him so much that he didn't realize that she was being deceived. He just needed to play the part, and everything would go as he planned. I honestly thought that he was a mommy's boy from the time I met Sarah, and recently I was convinced that he was. I finally understood after reading the chats. That guy used his mother as a tool to pay off his debts. He was a calm mommy's boy. He was attached to her only because he had a malicious plan to make the most use of her who spoiled him. It was an abominable action for a mother who raised her son single-handedly. He was a cruel man who was not worthy of working the same ground as us. When I revealed everything, why did you? He started crying. Sarah kept muttering that it was a lie to herself with a completely white face. I felt a little sorry for her, but then I thought she raised a spoiled brat who thought he could use her in the worst-case scenario. She was still giving him an allowance so that he would never leave her side. Even though he relied on her in an unbelievable way, she sowed the seeds. She got what she deserved in a way. Well, I am seriously worried about my marriage with an unfaithful man who is likely to be on the financial blacklist in the future. I want a divorce. There was no response from either of them when I declared that. I was disappointed, so I pressed harder. By the way, I erased the chat history, but I sent Foxy a message this morning while you were sleeping. I wrote, "I know I said a lot of things, but I love my mom and my wife." She replied that she didn't like you to begin with, and that she didn't care. I thought it might hurt your feelings, so I erased it. I'm nice, ain't I? Right, honey? When I said that much, Daniel finally looked at me. Give me back my Foxy. He started wailing. Seeing him like that, Sarah looked desperate as if she was dumped by him. I, on the other hand, couldn't hide my triumphant feeling and had a big smile on my face. Well, then you two go on a trip or do whatever. I'm going to charge you for my cancellation fee for this trip and alimony for adultery. I remembered that there was one more picture I had failed to produce and threw it to Daniel, who was still kneeling on the floor. It was of him kissing Foxy on the cheek. Sarah burst into tears at the sight of it, and he struggled to hide it. A woman quietly crying, and a man crawling on the ground in despair in the lobby of the airport. The audience watched from afar. I wondered what they thought had happened between the two. My short marriage was over just like that. My divorce was finalized not too long after I received my alimony. What was a little surprising was that Daniel asked me not to tell anyone he was a mommy's boy. For that, he agreed to pay a little higher than the market rate alimony. Apparently, it was too shameful for him to be known as a mommy's boy, even though it had been an act. I couldn't help but feel sorry for Sarah, but I guess it is what it is. She must have been totally knocked down by the truth. She no longer wanted to see his face and cut ties with her former beloved son. Once a woman has enough, it's fast to lose love. Daniel, on the other hand, who had unpaid debts and alimony payments, moved out of the apartments we once lived in. He tried to get help from Foxy, but as expected, he was turned away. He was holed up in an employee apartment for a short time, and to get out of his debt ASAP, he took on a second job. He was fired when his main job found out about it. He was such a moron as the company regulation clearly banned the side job. 10 years have passed since then, and he's still living in a shabby apartment with a communal bathroom, paying off his debts with the money he gets from his part-time jobs. As for me, I have remained single since then. Maybe because of what happened, I've lost my yearning for marriage. My romantic interest in men has completely faded away. If I were to choose between a man or a Wagyu steak, I'd be more excited about a steak. I am more interested in eating than romancing, even though I get indigestion easily nowadays. To be honest, I've since realized that it's easier to be alone. I have been enjoying my single life. It seems to suit my personality, maybe because of the no stress. My skin has also become clearer. I resigned from the company I was working for back then. I have now opened a lymphatic massage spa, which was my dream. It's a secret that the alimony I received from Daniel was used as a down payment to open my business. I have a stable income and a good number of customers. Oh, and I adopted a kitten from my ex-colleague before I left. She's a munchkin mix. I doted on her so much that she became a fat cat. She still looks adorable like that, but I think it's not good for her health. As a responsible owner, I reflect on this, and I'm on a diet with my cat. I am single, but I am never really alone. My life is colorful, surrounded by customers and a cat every day.
The unbelievable reality that awaited my husband, who did not attend my mother's funeral and traveled abroad, was another funeral.
Huh.
I can't go to the funeral. I'm going on a trip now. Besides, you haven't done much of wifey duties, and yet you were so selfish.
My beloved mother passed away after a long battle with illness, and it was my husband who lectured me not to impose his own common sense on me when I contacted him about the funeral arrangements. It's unbelievable. I don't know anyone more unreasonable who prioritizes a trip over his family's misfortune. Neither I nor the stupid man knew at the time that things would turn out so horribly a few days later. My name's Sally, 32 years old, and I work at my parents' flower shop. Many different people visit the shop, and I feel a sense of fulfillment every day. For example, people who order a bouquet of roses with a slightly embarrassed look on their faces to propose to their lovers. People who come to get gardening advice because it's their hobby. And Linda, a regular customer, was one of them. She was a very bright and talkative person who always made our family laugh. A few years ago, when I was at work, Linda suddenly asked me, "Are you dating anyone, Shelley?" I was surprised by the sudden question from Linda, but my mother answered right away, "I hope she meets someone nice. But Shelley is shy, so..." I couldn't help but blush. Although I had some dating experiences, I had never met anyone I could imagine marrying. However, my parents were probably worried about my future as an only child. Meanwhile, Linda, who found out I didn't have a boyfriend, said, "Would you like to meet my son?" That was how I met my husband, Edward. To be honest, I wasn't very excited at first, but as soon as I met him, my heart started beating. I was drawn to Edward's smiling face, which was like a blooming flower. He talked about his work, his friends, and his hobbies in traveling, and made me laugh a lot. We naturally became a couple and got married 2 years ago. I'm worried about Mom, so is it okay if we live together? My husband, who had been living with Linda at his parents' house, asked me about living together. If Linda, my mother-in-law, had been a difficult person, I might have hesitated, but I liked her, and we quickly decided to live together. I'm really happy that Shelley is becoming my daughter-in-law. Don't worry about the housework. Leave it to me. Shelley, just take care of your mother the most. I also felt like crying when Linda became a little teary-eyed. In fact, my mother had been in and out of the hospital after being diagnosed with cancer around that time. Her condition was not good, and my father and I were running the store. My mother used to have a good figure, but she had lost a lot of weight since she got sick. I haven't been this skinny in how many years? Although my mother was laughing, there were days when she was bedridden all day, when her body was not feeling well. For my parents' sake, I did the housework in my parents' home on the second floor between my jobs. Honestly, I was so busy that I couldn't even take care of my in-laws, and I was completely dependent on my mother-in-law. I'm sorry, Linda. I haven't been able to do much for this house. As I bowed my head to my mother-in-law, she smiled and said, "What are you saying? Don't worry about us, okay?" Previously, my mother-in-law said she regrets not being able to take care of her own parents. She always told me that. I was so grateful for having a mother-in-law like Linda. However, my husband Edward had a completely different attitude. I understand that your family is going through a tough time, but aren't you relying on too much on my mom? You got married, so think about which family should be prioritized. Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Since it was true that I was relying on my mother-in-law, I couldn't strongly argue back. Moreover,
When my husband saw me come back from my parents' house, he said, "Shelley, prepare the dinner. Hurry." Soon after coming home, my husband began to demand that I do housework. He gave me various orders, but he lay on the sofa, laughing while watching TV. My mother-in-law, who couldn't bear to see this go on, yelled, "Edward, stop it already. Her family is going through a tough time. You know that. And yet, you come home and order her around like a slave. Who do you think you are?" My husband was surprised and taken aback by the anger of my mother-in-law. "What are you talking about? I married because I wanted you to have an easy life. I just thought it was natural for daughter-in-law to prioritize her in-laws." My mother-in-law continued to scold my husband, who kept making excuses. "You're just like your father, with no consideration for others." With his mother's words, my husband sulked and fell silent. My in-laws were divorced, and Edward's father seems to have been quite a domineering husband, and my mother-in-law had a hard time with him. She laughed and told me that she was the one who asked for divorce after her grandparents passed away. From that day on, my husband became more subdued. But he didn't like it when my mother-in-law supported me more than him, and our relationship as a married couple wasn't that great. Meanwhile, my mother's condition worsened and she was hospitalized. The doctor told us that her condition was quite serious, so if there was anyone we wanted to see her, we should call them. When I told my husband and mother-in-law, Linda cried and said, "Shelley, your mother always listened to my boring stories with a smile. You must feel so lonely and frustrated." I tried not to cry too much, but my mother-in-law's words made tears overflow. We embraced each other and cried together. My husband had a look on his face as if he had been left behind. 3 weeks after that, my mother passed away. I had seen her suffer through hospitalizations and painful expressions, but in the end, she passed away as if falling asleep. "Mom, you can finally rest now. I'm happy for you." My father and I shed tears while looking at my mother. My husband and mother-in-law had been informed in advance about my mother's critical condition. "Please, spend some time together as a family of 3. Don't worry about us. Let us know if there is anything we can do." A few days later, my mother passed away, and I informed Linda about it, and she said, "Let's say goodbye with a smile, okay?" My father and I were truly grateful for her words. But the words that my husband Edward said were unbelievable. "Oh, I can't attend the funeral. I'm going on a trip. Besides, you haven't done much of wifey duties. And yet you were so selfish." My husband said that to me in a flat tone on the phone. "Wait a minute. What trip? Are you serious here? My mom has been in critical condition. Haven't I told you that in advance? Have I?" My husband sighed at my words. "Even if you say that, I applied for the trip 6 months ago, and it's too late to cancel now. Besides, it would be a waste of money." I became emotional at my husband's grumbling. "You're saying that you would rather go on a trip than attend my mother's funeral? Think about it for a sec. It's totally inhuman." "Shut up. I can't go anyway. Make it up." My husband hung up the phone after saying that. Neither my mother-in-law nor I had been informed about my husband's travel plans. He probably thought that we would stop him from going if we found out. I later learned that he had been secretly packing his bags in his car to avoid suspicion on the day of departure. When I returned to my in-laws' house and told my mother-in-law about the situation, Her face turned red with anger. Even at the funeral, she continued to apologize to my relatives for her son's unreasonable behavior. Linda, please lift your head up. You did nothing wrong. You have always been kind to me, and my father and I are grateful. My mother also used to say that she was glad to have you as my mother-in-law. My father next to me also spoke to my mother-in-law. Shelley is right. We are truly grateful to you for making time for our family to spend together at the end. My mother-in-law kept crying. In the end, we said goodbye to my mom with a smile. I thought that from now on, I would do my best for my in-law's house, as I had been relying on my mother-in-law so much. However, just 3 days after my mother passed away, something happened. As soon as I returned home from my parents' house to my in-law's house, I noticed that something was wrong. It was already dark, but there was no light in the house, and it was quiet inside. When I entered the living room, I was surprised and let out a loud voice. Linda! Linda! I found my mother-in-law on the floor. Her body had already become cold. I panicked, but immediately called an ambulance. However, shortly after arriving at the hospital, the doctor told me that my mother-in-law had passed away. The cause of death was a heart attack. It was a sudden and unbelievable reality. I contacted my father and tried to call my husband, but couldn't get through. It wasn't until 2 days after my mother-in-law's death that I was able to reach my husband. Shelley, I'm sorry about your mom's funeral. Well, I'm tired, so I want to rest at home soon. Are you resting too now? The funeral is over. He continued with a smirk, and I told him, we're about to attend the funeral. Huh? It's been about 5 days since your mother passed away, right? Hearing my husband's thoughtless words, I became emotional. It's your mother's, Linda's funeral. She had a heart attack 2 days ago and passed away while you were enjoying your trip like an idiot. In a raised voice, I hung up the phone and sent the address of the funeral home to my husband's smartphone. The master of the ceremony was my mother-in-law's brother, my uncle. My husband arrived after the funeral was over. Mom! Everyone looked at my husband with cold eyes as he arrived in a panic. He was wearing a brightly colored sweatshirt, in stark contrast to a black funeral attire. My uncle berated him for his inappropriate attire. Edward, why did you bother coming now? Shelley and Linda had told me everything. Do you even realize how stupid you were? My husband's face turned pale as my uncle raged on. Edward, did you enjoy your trip? Shelley had to work a new place, even though she just lost her mother's. My husband responded defensively to my father. Why didn't you tell me about something so important? What are you talking about? I called you multiple times. You even turned off your phone, didn't you? Your boss and colleagues even came to my mother's wake. It turned out that my husband had told his company that he was going on a family trip. His insensitive actions and words made me feel really pathetic. Of course, my husband's colleagues and bosses came to Linda's wake as well. He fell to his knees and started crying loudly, but no one comforted him. Then I approached him with a certain determination. By the way, you know what I want the most right now. I want a divorce from you. I glared at him as he begged and cried. Why? Why divorce? I'll work hard. Without you, Shelley, Yeah, right. Without me, there won't be anyone to take care of your daily life, right? Wait, are you kidding me? I refuse to live a life like that. I don't need you in my life. After I coldly and calmly said that, my husband didn't say anything back. After a while, our divorce was finalized, with my father accompanying me during the discussion. In the end, my husband completely turned around and said to me, "You will regret leaving me. I'm going to be rich." I felt nothing but disgust towards my ex-husband, who spoke as if he was taunting us. The husband who used to have a smile as beautiful as blooming flowers was no longer there. Moreover, to my surprise, he had quit his job. Or rather, he had no choice but to quit. After that incident, when he went to work, he received harsh, icy stares from his boss and colleagues. Unable to bear it, he apparently quit his job, using a resignation agency a few days later. When I heard about it, I was disgusted by his dishonesty. I couldn't help but feel ashamed that he had once been my husband. Breaking up with him was truly the best decision. Several weeks after the divorce was finalized, my ex-husband ran into the store with a pale face and pleaded, "Shelley, please help me. This can't be happening." As it turned out, on the day my mother passed away, my late mother-in-law Linda had taken a certain action. She had changed the beneficiary of her life insurance to me with the intention of cutting ties with Edward. My ex-husband, who planned to support himself with the life insurance for the time being, was quite panicked after finding out about this. Yet, he thought he could manage somehow, as he still had the house. But the house had originally belonged to his uncle. Having lost his job and his house, my ex-husband boldly asked me for help. "Hey, help me out, Shelley. Can you let me stay in this house for a while? This is all because you took the money that I was supposed to receive. You should take responsibility and support me." I retorted to my incoherent ex-husband with those words. "I am deeply grateful for all the help your mother had given to me, but I have no gratitude towards you." Then my ex-husband turned bright red and tried to grab me. "Edward, stop it already. Don't come any closer to my daughter." My father immediately appeared from the back of the store and pulled my ex-husband away. Then we heard the sound of a police car stopping in front of the store. "My daughter's ex-husband is stalking her. Please, take this guy away. Quickly." My father had reported Edward to the police as soon as he saw him. My agitated ex-husband's elbow hit the police officer's cheek, and he was taken away in. After that, my ex-husband's life followed a downward spiral. He apparently asked his relatives for help, but was rejected by all of them. It was a case of reaping what he sowed. I also issued a restraining order against him. Since that day, he hasn't appeared in front of me again. And then, I rented the empty store next to the shop and started a flower arrangement class. At first, most of the students were regular customers, but now we have new students joining us, and we are enjoying it. My father was depressed for a while, but gradually regained his spirits and worked hard. My mother and mother-in-law Linda loved this shop, and I want to continue to protect it with my father.
My husband has passed away, but my mother-in-law keeps visiting me and bullying me.
Lucia, are you here again? You don't have veto power. A daughter-in-law is still a daughter-in-law, even if her husband is gone. You are my slave for life. I will use you well. My mother-in-law laughed high when she said this. Apparently, she's misunderstanding something, so I decided to tell her. My name is Lily. I'm a 30-year-old housewife. My husband James and I have been married for 3 years. We used to be seniors and juniors in our company, and my husband was 2 years older than me. He worked very hard to teach me his job as a trainer, and I became more and more attracted to him. After that, my days were soaked in work for a while, that I could not devote much time to romance. But after 3 years had passed since I joined the company, he and I started working on a project together, and we quickly grew closer. During and after the project, we started going out for drinks after work together. And then, we started to go out on weekends as well, and that was the start of our relationship. 2 years after we started dating, he proposed to me and we got married. Upon our marriage, I retired from my job and became a full-time housewife. My husband was a successful businessman and had already become a section manager with a high salary, and I quit my job because I wanted to experience being a full-time housewife for once. We were very happy as newlyweds, and I enjoyed the time I spent cooking for my husband. My husband always eats my cooking with a smile on his face and says it is delicious, which makes it worthwhile. I also prepared his lunchbox every day, and he shows me his empty lunchbox, saying how delicious it was. My husband was so adorable that I put all my effort into cooking for him every day. On our days off, we would go for drives, enjoy our dates, and spend really happy days together. But even such a happy married life has its problems. And for me, it was my mother-in-law. "Lily, why don't you come to visit me? Normally, if you were a housewife, you would show up at your husband's parents' house every day to do housework, wouldn't you?" I've never heard of such a thing before. Sorry, but Lucia, are you still in good health, aren't you? I have my hands full doing the daily chores at our own house, so it is difficult for me to show up at your place every day. When I said this, Lucia glared at me. "Are you trying to talk back to me, even though you are my daughter-in-law? What kind of upbringing have you received from your parents?" I was offended by her words. I don't think my parents had anything to do with it. In the first place, Lucia, you suddenly came to our house without any appointment like this just now. I don't think that's a very sensible thing to do. What kind of upbringing did you have? I'm actually a pretty strong-willed person, so whenever my mother-in-law said something to me, I would talk back like this. "What a cocky daughter-in-law you are! I can't believe someone like you married James." We are married, even if you don't believe us. I say this and you say that. That's enough. I'm leaving. I didn't invite you, so please feel free to leave. My mother-in-law left, looking frustrated because I was so firm in my retort. But one day, my mother-in-law did something terrible to bring me down. It was one New Year's Day, when I was at my parents-in-law's house, and there was a gathering of relatives. My mother-in-law asked me to help her prepare the food for the feast with her. "Lily, I want you to make the first thing you serve everyone." Okay. I was told to do so, and I prepared carpaccio for the number of people that would go well with wine. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law prepared the main course and other dishes. I had finished the carpaccio and wanted to help her prepare the other dishes, but she said, "All we have to do now is to serve the food we bought or got delivered. So please help Connor." She kicked me out of the kitchen. I had imagined that my mother-in-law would have me do a lot of cooking while she looked down on me. But I was surprised to find that I was not burdened with as much work as I had expected. After that, my father-in-law, my husband, and I cleaned up the house, prepared the table, and waited for the relatives to arrive. When everyone had arrived, I set the table with enough alcohol for the number of people under my mother-in-law's direction. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law served the carpaccio I had prepared. "Please have this one first. This one was made by my daughter-in-law Lily." My mother-in-law said so, and the relatives were like, thank you. and tried some. But the next moment, they started talking like,
It's too spicy. What the heck is this? It's spicy.
huh? I didn't know what happened. But all my relatives were saying it was spicy and looked not well. That can't be true, I thought. Then I took a bite of my carpaccio and found that it was very spicy, just as my relatives said. It tasted as if Tabasco had been poured on it. I hadn't seasoned it in any way, so the culprit was my mother-in-law. When I looked at my mother-in-law, she was smiling at me.
This tastes too pungent for old people like us. Sorry, Lily. Can you take it away, please?
One by one, the relatives put down their carpaccio and guzzled their beer to get rid of the spiciness. I'm sorry my daughter-in-law seems to have screwed this up. She's not very good at cooking. My mother-in-law says to the relatives with a victorious look on her face. I'm worried about whether James is getting a proper meal. The relatives look at my husband with wry smiles, but James looks pouty.
Lily always cooks very good food. I'm sure this is spicy, but she just happened to fail only this time. The food she usually cooks is really good, so much so that I always come home without going out for a drink.
My husband helped me like this, but his relatives were skeptical. Some of them were skeptical that my husband's sense of taste was not right. Even if I had told my mother-in-law had put Tabasco in the dish, it was more likely that my mother-in-law would say that I only tried to blame Lucia. So I had to put up with it as it was done to me. I'm sure that James' relatives would have perceived me as a wife who is not a good cook. I left the New Year's gathering feeling very frustrated. My mother-in-law's triumphant face makes me angry, even when I remember it now. Then my mother-in-law came over to my house again during the day and laughed about what happened at New Year's. You really are a terrible cook. Lucia, that was your doing, right? What are you talking about? Do you have any proof that I did anything? There's no proof, but I could definitely taste the peppers. I knew you were a bad cook. It was Tabasco. It was Tabasco? I didn't know that. Oh yes, about 30 drops of Tabasco that I had at home. You just confessed you put it in yourself. Lucia got upset when I said that, but she quickly fought back. Shut up. I did it to humiliate you. But thanks to you, it was a huge success. Everyone now knows that you're a useless wife who can't cook. That sucks. No matter how much she didn't like me, she went to such lengths to make all her relatives eat spicy food. I was thoroughly disgusted with my mother-in-law. I immediately reported this to my husband. My husband was furious and called my mother-in-law.
Mom, what are you acting like a child? There is no way you are going to bring our relatives into this and embarrass them just because my wife talked back to you.
My husband was so fierce that he confronted my mother-in-law, and my mother-in-law's voice on the phone was trembling. I was trying to give my cocky daughter-in-law a good scolding.
Lily didn't do anything wrong. As far as I'm concerned, I think you're rather worse than Lily.
Oh no! Even you say such things?
Please don't do anything to hurt Lily anymore. The next time you come to my house without permission, I will cut off the ties between you and me.
All right, I got it. So please don't say that. My mother-in-law seems to become anxious because my husband even told her he was going to cut ties with her. And because of that, she no longer comes storming into my house to pick on me. James, thank you.
I'm sorry I didn't realize it until this happened.
I'm sorry it took me so long to talk to you about it. It was nice to know that my husband was on my side no matter what. From then on, we had a very peaceful and calm day. I didn't realize how much less stressful it would be if my mother-in-law just didn't come to my house. However, while I was spending happy days with my husband again, something very sad happened. My husband had a car accident and lost his life. It was so sudden that I could not catch up with my emotions. I was so sad that I had no memory of the funeral. I could not accept the reality that my husband was gone. It was after 2 months that I finally began to feel at peace. Although I sometimes felt my chest tighten with sadness and loneliness at the loss of my husband, I was still able to go about my daily life. But then, my mother-in-law came back into my life. "Hey, Lily, where have you been wandering around?" "Lucia, what are you doing here?" To my surprise, my mother-in-law was waiting for me in front of my apartment. "What were you doing out this late at night?" "I was working." "Work? Have you forgotten about James and are you just going about your daily life?" "Well, I have to work to earn a living."
"So you didn't love him after all?"
"Huh?"
"You married James because he's good at work and gives you money."
"What are you talking about? I love James, and I'm still sad about the loss of my beloved husband."
"If that were the case, you wouldn't be working just because 2 months has passed."
What kind of logic is that? Come on.
"Shut up. Let me in the house anyway."
"Why should I let you in my house?"
"You. Are you going to reject your own mother-in-law?"
I didn't want to let my mother-in-law in the house, but I thought that was indeed a terrible idea, so I had no choice but to let her in.
"There is dust on James' picture."
"I was just about to clean it up when I got home."
"Don't lie to me like that. You didn't do anything."
"That's not true. I clean it regularly."
"I don't believe you."
I immediately regretted that I let my mother-in-law in the house. My mother-in-law is constantly abusing me. I'm fed up with her awfulness as usual.
"I knew you are a terrible cook."
"Lucia, how long are you going to stay here?"
"I'm your mother-in-law, so you shouldn't mind if I stay longer."
"No, but..."
"Don't think that just because James passed away, we're not going to end our relationship."
My mother-in-law looked so proud of herself.
"I will be back again."
What did she mean by again? Why does my mother-in-law need to visit me so many times? I was extremely anxious. Even though I was not mentally well yet, the added stress of my mother-in-law was quite hard on me. And sure enough, my mother-in-law came again the next day. "Lucia, you came again?"
"You don't have the right to veto anything, so just let me in."
I knew I had to protect myself, so I didn't let my mother-in-law in the house.
"Let me in, you little brat."
My mother-in-law kept knocking on the door, but I ignored her. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and she seems to have given up. So now, she started to intercom repeatedly during the day on my days off. Each time, the intercom would ring inside the house, and it was really loud. Moreover, sometimes a courier or someone else would come in, so I had to check who it was every time. Also, when I let the delivery person in, my mother-in-law came inside the apartment with him. And then, saying that I'm her relative, she comes into my room without my permission while I'm signing for the delivery. "Hey Lucia, please don't break into my apartment without permission."
"It's okay. I'm related to you. Even if my son is gone, my daughter-in-law is still my daughter-in-law. You're my slave for life, and I will give you a job."
Saying that, my mother-in-law laughs out loud. "But don't you need to take care of Connor?"
"I don't have a problem if I don't take care of him for a little while. He's about to die anyway."
That's terrible. In fact, my father-in-law has been suffering from a limp for about a year now, and is in need of nursing care. I was told that my mother-in-law is taking care of him, But considering the fact that she keeps coming to my house like this, I worry that he's not being taken care of at all. No matter what, I have to stop my mother-in-law from coming to this house again and again. So I thought about if there is anything I can do to stop her. So I decided to ask my lawyer friend. Then, she gave me an advice. That way, I would not have to worry about my mother-in-law following me around. And my mother-in-law came again, without learning her lesson. "Lily, here I am again. Let me in and get me some coffee and snacks." My mother-in-law says this over the intercom, grinning at me. "I won't let you in the house anymore. I'm already a stranger to you." "What are you talking about? I told you before. Even if my son died, my daughter-in-law is still my daughter-in-law, which means we are family." I told my mother-in-law, who is misunderstanding something, a certain fact. "I'm sorry, but I'm no longer married to James." "No, that's not true. You can't get a divorce. You are still married." Have you ever heard of something called a marriage termination certificate? You don't know, right? A termination of marital status notification is a divorce from your spouse after the death of your spouse, legally severing your relationship with your in-laws, or for me, Lucia and Connor. I have filed that notification, so I'm now a stranger to you. Huh? I don't approve of that. First of all, you can't submit such a thing without my permission. No, I can submit it as long as I'm willing. It doesn't matter whether you approve or not. In other words, I have no more obligation to let you in my house only because I'm related to you, and I had no choice to back them. Don't be silly. Just let me in. Give up and leave. If you insist on staying any longer, I will call the police. The police? My ex-mother-in-law reacted to the word police. That's right. A complete stranger is persistently pressing the intercom. So it's no wonder I would think you're a stalker. Stalker? Please leave now. If you don't leave within 10 seconds, I will call the police. 10, 9, 8. Wait a minute, I'm leaving. Saying this, my mother-in-law hurriedly opened the entrance door and left the apartment entrance. Apparently, the word police had quite an effect. However, my sanctions and retribution against my mother-in-law did not end. In fact, I recorded a few conversations with my mother-in-law during her frequent visits. I had recorded her saying that my father-in-law was going to die anyway. There was also an audio recording of my mother-in-law confessing to putting Tabasco in my carpaccio at the family gathering, which I thought I would never have a chance to use. I sent the data to my father-in-law. Although my father-in-law has a limp, he can use a computer, so he does email and play music and videos in his room. When I sent the audio data, my father-in-law seems to have listened to it immediately and called me right away.
I'm sorry about everything my wife has done to you until now. Leave the rest to me. Also, I heard that you filed for termination of marital relations, and I think you made the right decision. I'm going to end my marital relationship with that stupid woman too.
My father-in-law laughed and hung up the phone. After that, my father-in-law was so furious with my mother-in-law that he confronted her with the divorce papers. My mother-in-law was pale when she heard the voice data I had sent to my father-in-law. And when she was divorced, she cried and begged him not to abandon her. If she was going to beg him like that, I wish she hadn't said anything bad about my father-in-law from the beginning. Well, I guess people who are not very smart don't understand such things. Then, my father-in-law kicked out my mother-in-law and even talked to his relatives to clear up the misunderstanding about the carpaccio at that time. After Connor divorced Lucia, Connor sold the house and went into a nursing home. My father-in-law has been nice to me all the time, so I regularly showed up at the facility to give him updates about me. My father-in-law seems to be happy when I come to see him, and he says that the facility takes better care of him than when he lived with my mother-in-law at home, and his health is better than before. As for my ex-mother-in-law, she was kicked out by my father-in-law, and even more so by her relatives, who cursed her for making them eat spicy food to spite her daughter-in-law. And now she lives a poor and lonely life, working part-time with no one to rely on. It's all self-inflicted, and it's a really nice feeling. I, on the other hand, am now back at the workplace of my former employer, and have recently been able to participate in some major projects. I worked hard, remembering the days when I worked with my husband. I think I will continue to work hard for a while, and gradually get used to life without my husband. I wonder what kind of nerve she has to come back to pick on her daughter-in-law, even after the death of her own son. Still, it was a relief to see her mother-in-law fall out of line when she was finally sanctioned. I'm glad her father-in-law was on Lily's side. I'm sure Lily won't be completely well yet, but I wish her the best of luck in moving forward and living her life.